Thank you, Nina and Ricky. Good evening, everyone. I'm Alma Angeles for NET25 World News on tonight's headlines. And in a dramatic turn of events, Vice President Sara Duterte has flown to the Netherlands to support her father, former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte, who was arrested and transported to The Hague on Tuesday.
Meron na pong arrangements kasi kailangan ko pausapin yung mga abogado doon kung saan man siya dalhin. Punta kami, ako, at pupunta yung mga abogado and doon kami mag-uusap po.
Ukraine says it will accept a U.S. proposal for a 30-day ceasefire in its war with Russia. In response, the U.S. has agreed to resume military aid and intelligence sharing with Ukraine.
And our hope is that the Russians will say yes, that they will also agree, so the shooting will stop, the killing will stop.
And the news starts now. And in a dramatic turn of events, Vice President Sara Duterte has flown to the Netherlands to support her father, former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte, who was arrested and transported to The Hague on Tuesday.
Meron na pong arrangements kasi kailangan ko pausapin yung mga abogado doon kung saan man siya dalhin. Punta kami, ako, at pupunta yung mga abogado and doon kami mag-uusap kung ano yung mga gagawin. Nakalagay sa rules ng ICC, the defendant should be taken to a court, a local court. Dapat dinala siya sa korte. At yung proseso natin dito sa loob, yun yung masusunod para sa pagkakitan ng warrant. One more year that they are doing it right now, there's no talking to the president. Because it's very easy for him to say, do not turn him over to the ICC. You can detain him here, wherever.
The ICC has been probing these alleged extrajudicial killings since 2018, despite the Philippines withdrawing from the ICC in 2019.
So yes, there is a very clear document that will explain that will explain the basis on how we conducted this arrest of former President Duterte. We comply with our commitments to Interpol.
Sara Duterte boarded a morning flight to Amsterdam, aiming to coordinate her father's legal defense. Her team has not disclosed how long she plans to stay in the Netherlands. Meanwhile, Duterte's lawyers are preparing to meet and explore all possible legal remedies, including determining where he will be held and seeking access to him. Duterte's youngest daughter, Veronica, filed a habeas corpus petition with the Philippine Supreme Court to demand her father's return.
Itong ginawa ng gobyerno, sasabihin niya, wala na, umalis na, wala na kayong jurisdiction. Hindi po pwede, alam nyo, the illegal act follows the actor. Kung yan ginawa mo, you start an illegal act from the very start, lahat ng ginawa mo ay magiging illegal, gaya ng ginawa nila. Kasi sila ang lumabag ng batas. Kinuha nila pwersahan ang presidente. Isinakay nila sa eroplano laban sa kanyang kalooban. Dinala nila sa isang bansa. So yung illegal na kanilang ginawa, sinusundan yan. Madali sabi, ang gobyerno ay meron pa rin kasalanan. Kahit saan ka magpunta, you are still bound by your illegal acts and you have to be accountable to this country, specifically sa Korte Suprema, sapagkat yan ang mandato niya ang magbigay ng desisyon sa anumang paglabag sa saligang batas.
Yung TRO, modern academic na yan kasi nandun na, lumilipad na siya papuntang Netherlands. Hindi natin alam kung ang Supreme Court desisyonan pa nila yan o hindi na. Kasi nga naman, wala nang jurisdiction ng Supreme Court yan. Nandun na sa ICC ang jurisdiction. So hindi naman pwedeng utusan ng Supreme Court yung ICC.
As the first Asian former head of state potentially facing trial, at the ICC, Duterte's case marks a significant moment in international justice. The ICC maintains jurisdiction over crimes committed before the Philippines withdrew from the court, setting the stage for a historical trial.
This is the first case, I think, that is going to deal with a situation that is not from sort of war or election-related violence. This is basically about extrajudicial killings within the so-called drug war. So it's basically about a president ordering its forces to sort of clean up the streets from alleged narco traffickers, which led to thousands of civilian deaths. So I think it's also in that sense special, and of course is the first case that relates to Asia that is leading to a trial. So in many ways it's really a first. Well, I assume there's going to be legal challenges about him being transferred because of course the Philippines left the ICC, I think in 2019. So I can imagine that's going to be the first sort of the first hurdle, but then it's going to be months and months of pre-trial, sort of processes. So I don't imagine that we're going to see a trial actually start before probably something like next year.
Meanwhile, China says it's keeping a close eye on the situation after the Philippines arrested former President Rodrigo Duterte on an international criminal court warrant. During a briefing, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning reiterated Beijing's stance at the ICC that the ICC should act cautiously and avoid politicization. Take a look.
This is an important incident. China has noted the relevant news and is closely following the development of the situation. I would like to reiterate that China has always advocated that the International Criminal Court should strictly abide by the principle of complementary jurisdiction, exercise its powers prudently in accordance with the law, and avoid politicization and double standards.
Ukraine says it will accept a U.S. proposal for a 30-day ceasefire in its war with Russia. In response, the U.S. has agreed to resume military aid and intelligence sharing with Ukraine. And U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the U.S. will now take the offer to Russia, adding the ball is in Moscow's court. Thomas Eyelikeness for more.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and other top American officials met Tuesday in Saudi Arabia with a delegation from Ukraine led by President Volodymyr Zelensky's Chief of Staff, Andriy Yermak. Rubio says more than 8 hours of talks led to an agreement.
We made an offer that the Ukrainians have accepted, which is to enter into a ceasefire and into immediate negotiations to end this conflict in a way that's enduring and sustainable and accounts for their interests, their security, their ability to prosper as a nation.
As well as the ceasefire, Washington and Kyiv agreed to complete a deal for developing Ukraine's critical mineral resources. Rubio says the next step is to get Russia to buy into the truce.
And our hope is that the Russians will say yes, that they will also agree, so the shooting will stop, the killing will stop, the dying will stop, and the talks can begin about how to end this war permanently in a way that's acceptable and enduring for both sides.
But getting the Russians on board may not be easy. Russian President Vladimir Putin and his diplomats have repeatedly stated they're against a ceasefire. They say they want a deal that safeguards Russia's long-term security. And Putin has ruled out territorial concessions, demanding that Ukraine fully withdraw from 4 Ukrainian regions claimed and partly controlled by Russia. Zelensky, who did not take part in the talks, says the ceasefire will take effect as soon as Russia agrees.
During today's talks, the American side proposed taking a first step forward, establishing a full ceasefire for 30 days. Not just stopping missiles, drones, and bombs, not just ensuring security in the Black Sea, but implementing a complete ceasefire along the entire front line. Ukraine welcomes this proposal. We see it as a positive proposal and are ready to take this step.
Zelensky's Chief of Staff, Andriy Yermak, says Ukraine is ready to work with Russia to end the war, and Yermak says after 3 years of fighting, Kyiv is committed to peace.
3 years is a long period of time. And for the people in the world, it's necessary once again to understand, not Ukraine started this war, but Ukraine ready for just and lasting peace.
The mood in Europe is optimistic following news that Kyiv is ready to put down arms if Moscow is. In a post on X, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says the EU welcomes news of a potential truce. She says the ball is now in Russia's court. NATO chief Mark Rutte says he's hopeful, but he wants to see what comes next.
I would be optimistic, but of course we have to see. I know that, first of all, President Trump, I think, has broken the deadlock, as I said, on the situation now in Ukraine, and I think that is important. And that leadership we needed, and we need going forward. I know that the Ukrainian president is very much committed to peace. So I'm not going to predict the outcome of today. It will be an important step in a somewhat longer process. But I will be cautiously optimistic.
Back in Washington, U.S. President Donald Trump says he hopes this is the first step to ending the war, and he says it's now time for Moscow to make a move.
Now we have to go to Russia, and hopefully President Putin will agree to that also, and we can get this show on the road. We can get this horrible war where 2,000-3,000 soldiers a week, every week, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 sometimes. I get the reports. And they're not American soldiers. They're Ukrainian and they're Russian.
Trump says he'll invite Zelensky back to the White House where they can sign the minerals deal.
Is Zelensky invited back to the White House? Sure, absolutely.
Mr. President.
Thomas Eyelikeness, NET25 World News.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has reiterated Moscow's stance on the Ukraine conflict, emphasizing that NATO's expansion was a key factor leading to the crisis. Lavrov stated that had Ukraine not pursued NATO membership, the conflict could have been avoided.
But he doesn't want provide these guarantees, security guarantees to Ukraine under Zelensky. He has his own view of the situation, which he bluntly presents every now and then, that this war should have never started, that the pulling Ukraine into NATO in violation of its constitution and violation of the Declaration of Independence of 1991, on the basis of which we recognized Ukraine as a sovereign state, for several reasons, including that this declaration was saying no NATO, no blocs, neutral status.
Meanwhile, the foreign minister has also made a pointed critique of European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen's efforts to boost European defense spending. Lavrov suggests that von der Leyen's push for remilitarization is a strategic attempt to divert attention away from the deeper economic and social challenges facing European nations.
We want a peace through strength. And this is the reason why I present today to the leaders the Rearm Europe plan. The Rearm Europe plan provides up to 800 billion euros for defense investment. It gives the member states fiscal space to invest in defense. It gives the member states possibility to invest in the Ukrainian defense industry or to procure military capabilities that go right away to Ukraine.
Führer Ursula is mobilizing everybody, everybody to remilitarize Europe. Some unbelievable sums of money are being mentioned. And many people think that this is a trick to divert attention of the population from those dozens and hundreds of billions of euros which have been spent during the COVID days and during the assistance to Ukraine without proper auditing. It's a discussion which is being raised.
Now, U.S. President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs on steel and aluminum imports took effect today, imposing 25% duties with no exemptions. And within hours, the European Union fired back, announcing $28 billion in reciprocal tariffs set to begin next month. Take a look.
Donald Trump's tariffs on imports of metals took effect Wednesday. They imposed 25% duties on shipments of steel and aluminum, with no countries excepted. The tariffs also hit hundreds of products made from the metals, from nuts and bolts to bulldozer blades and soda cans.
The European Union must act to protect consumers and business. The countermeasures we take today are strong but proportionate. As the United States are applying tariffs worth $28 billion, we are responding with countermeasures worth 26 billion euros. This matches the economic scope of the tariffs of the United States. Our countermeasures will be introduced in 2 steps, starting with April 1st and fully in place as of April 13th. In the meantime, we will always remain open to negotiations. We firmly believe that in a world fraught with geo-economic and political uncertainties, it is not in our common interest to burden our economies with such tariffs.
Within hours, the EU fired back with $28 billion in reciprocal duties. Those tariffs will kick in from the start of next month. Canada is also mulling how to respond to the latest moves. Speaking Tuesday in Houston, Texas, Energy Minister Jonathan Wilkinson said Canada could limit sales of oil to the US.
But when we're talking about sort of non-tariff retaliation, it could be about restricting supply. It could be putting our own export duties on products. It could be energy and minerals. It could be broader than that.
Canada is the largest supplier of imported oil to the US, shipping some 4 million barrels per day. Wilkinson says a levy on US ethanol is another option being considered. In Australia, the government was disappointed not to win an exemption from the new tariffs, something Trump said last month he would seriously consider. However, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said it would be counterproductive for Australia to respond with tariffs of its own.
Tariffs and escalating trade tensions are a form of economic self-harm and a recipe for slower growth and higher inflation. They are paid by the consumers. This is why Australia will not be imposing reciprocal tariffs on the United States.
Other countries facing a significant hit from the Trump tariffs include Brazil, Mexico and South Korea. However, the new charges have been welcomed by a US Steel Industry Association, which said the measures would supercharge domestic production. Investors are less sure, with US stocks shedding more than $4 trillion in value over recent weeks amid concerns about the trade war.
The U.S. Department of Education is laying off nearly half its workforce, a move seen as the first step toward shutting down the agency entirely.
The U.S. Department of Education said on Tuesday it would lay off nearly half its staff, a possible first step towards a total shutdown.
Nobody shows up to work because...
The move comes as government agencies scramble to meet President Donald Trump's Thursday deadline to submit plans for a second round of mass layoffs. The terminations are part of what the department called in a press release its, quote, final mission, alluding to Trump's vow to eliminate the department.
President Trump understands that we'll be working with Congress.
Asked on Fox News whether the firings would lead to the department's dismantling, Secretary of Education Linda McMahon said yes, adding that doing so, quote, was the president's mandate. The Department of Education oversees $1.6 trillion in college loans, enforces civil rights laws in schools, and provides federal funding for needy districts. The department said affected employees will be placed on administrative leave starting on March 21st. Meanwhile, the union representing more than 2,800 department workers there vowed to fight what it called the draconian cuts. The layoffs are the latest step in Trump's sweeping effort to downsize the government. Led by billionaire Elon Musk and his Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE has cut more than 100,000 jobs across the 2.3 million-member federal civilian bureaucracy, frozen most foreign aid, and canceled thousands of programs and contracts. Dozens of lawsuits have been filed challenging the legality of those moves, and the blunt force approach has frustrated several White House officials and Republican lawmakers, some of whom have been confronted by angry constituents at town halls.
President Donald Trump defended his tariff policies during a meeting with top U.S. business leaders, dismissing concerns over market volatility and touting the economic benefits of his trade strategy.
Donald Trump has defended his use of tariffs and dismissed concerns about market volatility sparked by the global trade turmoil. Speaking to a gathering of business leaders in Washington on Tuesday, the US president said his trade policy was already showing results.
We have car companies that are not building in Mexico now. They're building in the United States. Some of them, the plants were already started and they stopped construction, and now they're going to build in the United States. It was very unfair. They'd build in Mexico and sell them across the border with no tax, no nothing. They'd take away our jobs. They'd close up places in Michigan and all over the country. And tariffs are, they don't want to pay 25% or whatever it may be. It may go up higher, maybe go up higher.
In the audience were around 100 CEOs, and some of them may be feeling growing unease. They've all seen some $4 trillion wiped off the value of US stocks in recent weeks, amid fears over the impact of the trade war. Businesses have also been concerned by the volatility of the tariffs, which have been variously imposed and delayed, raised and lowered. On Tuesday, there was more of that, with turmoil over duties on Canadian metals. Early in the day, Trump said he would double levies to 50%. He was responding to a move by the Canadian province of Ontario to impose its own tariffs on electricity supplied to America. Hours later, Ontario dropped the move, and Trump said US duties would stick at 25%.
A little while ago, I had an opportunity to speak to Secretary Lutnick. And Secretary Lutnick has sent out an olive branch to us to come down and immediately meet with him, meet with the whole trade administration, and discuss the future. Rather than waiting till April the 2nd, threats going back and forth, tit for tat, I've agreed to suspend temporarily, and we always have that tool in our toolkit, until we sit down over the next day or two. I'll be heading down to Washington along with Dominic LeBlanc, and we'll have a good discussion. There's a point that both parties are heated and the temperature needs to come down. And I thought this was the right decision. They understand how serious we are about the electricity and the tariffs, and rather than going back and forth and having threats to each other, we have both agreed, let cooler heads prevail. We need to sit down and move this forward.
The fresh day of turmoil drove another down day for stocks, outweighing glimmers of hope over a Ukraine ceasefire. More big firms, including retailer Kohl's, also warned that the darkening economic outlook was hitting sales. In the end, the Dow Jones Index closed the day down another 1%. But if that worries Trump, it didn't show on Tuesday.
The tariffs are having a tremendously positive impact. They will have, and they are having.
Trump said his tariffs would generate a lot of money for the US and could be raised even higher in the days ahead.
Look, the higher it goes, the more likely it is they're going to build. And ultimately, the biggest win is not the tariff. That's a big win. That's a lot of money. But the biggest win is if they move into our country and produce jobs. That's a bigger win than the tariffs themselves.
And the news continues here on NET25. We'll be right back. A surfer is feared dead after being attacked by a shark in shallow water on a remote beach in Western Australia. A 37-year-old man from Melbourne had been reported missing after witnesses saw a struggle and heard screams at Wharton Beach, a remote area about 800 kilometers from the state capital Perth. Jenna Despi reports.
Authorities recovered a surfboard with bite marks from the beach. Police believe the man died during the attack over the noon hour. Western Australia Police Commissioner Colonel Blanche says drone footage shot by a witness captured a shark swimming away from a large cloud of blood close to the shore. Officials called off a search for the man's body on Tuesday. They do not expect him to be found. Local media say the man had been vacationing with his girlfriend when the attack took place. They had been planning to meet his family in Western Australia later in the week. The man's suspected death would be the fourth fatal shark attack in the area since 2017. Two of the deaths are suspected to have been caused by the great white sharks, which can grow up to 6 meters in length. Jen Despy, Perth, Australia, for NET25 World News.
An Australian man has made medical history by becoming the first person in the world to leave the hospital with a total artificial heart implant. Take a look.
Oh, this is the big one. You know, this is quite incredible. This is a device that's been in the making for 20 years, as you've heard earlier. It's an incredibly novel device and ingenious, really, the way it works. And it works. And so to finally get this device to help some of our sick patients has been, you know, enormously gratifying. Yeah, well, you're sort of lost in the moment, I guess, and there's a lot going on, but it's an incredibly easy device. You stitch those to the atria, as I said, and then you literally click the pump in, and then hand off this drive line, and turn it on. So that's a sort of, you know, a moment where everyone holds their breath, but it turns on and it works. And then you slowly wean the patient off the heart-lung machine, which is keeping them alive while you do the surgery, and the pump takes over, and it did. Well, the older technology is clunky. It's bigger than this, and it has a lot of moving parts in it, in particular valves that have to open and close. So whenever the blood interacts with components like that, there's risk for failure. This literally has one moving part in it, as you saw earlier, a spinning rotor. One side of it pumps to the lungs, the other side pumps to the body.
Yeah, so he had the device for 104 days before his transplant, so 3.5 months, and he was discharged from hospital along that way. And so that was, you know, a world first for us. I mean, ultimately, that's what our goal is, to return these patients back to a normal quality of life. And he did return to a normal quality of life outside of the hospital. So, you know, this gives us an incredible hope that in the future, we won't need to bring him back in for a transplant, that they can just stay out, keep the device, you know, for the rest of their life.
And with that, we end tonight's broadcast. For everyone here on NET25, I'm Alma Angeles. Thank you all for joining us. Good night.